From the ashes of the old world comes a chrome rebirth, shining with the light of innovation and a brand new spirit. Experience the powerful transformation of characters as they embrace the future with open arms. Subscribe today and witness the birth of a brand new era in storytelling.
The day my daughter-in-law handed me an invoice for $340,000, I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I folded it neatly in half, slid it into my shirt pocket, and said, "I'll think about it." Then I walked to my truck, sat in the driveway for a long moment, and smiled. Not because it was funny, because I finally understood exactly what I was dealing with. My name is Robert. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working as a senior project estimator for a commercial construction firm in Columbus, Ohio. I know how to read a contract. I know how to spot a number that doesn't add up. And I know, better than most, what it costs when you sign something without reading the fine print. My wife Carol passed away 11 years ago. Breast cancer. Diagnosed late. Gone within 14 months. She was the kind of woman who remembered every birthday, kept a garden in the backyard, and made our son Daniel believe, with complete sincerity, that he was capable of anything he put his mind to. She wasn't wrong about that. She just didn't live long enough to see what he'd put his mind to. I raised Daniel alone from the time he was 19. He was already in college when Carol died, studying business administration at Ohio State. I kept paying his tuition, kept his apartment funded, kept his car insured. Not because I had to, because Carol would have wanted me to. Because he was our son, and grief doesn't pause your responsibilities to the people you love. Daniel graduated, got a decent entry-level job at a marketing firm, and for a few years, things were good between us. We'd have dinner on Sunday evenings. He'd call me on weekday mornings during his commute. We talked about the Buckeyes, about whether I should finally replace the gutters on the house, about Carol sometimes, carefully, the way you talk about someone you both miss so much it still catches you off guard. Then he met Vanessa. I want to be careful here, because I don't believe in speaking poorly of people without being specific. So, let me be specific. Vanessa came from a family with money. Not working money, old money. The kind that had been sitting in accounts long enough that nobody in the family could clearly explain where it originated. Her father owned several commercial properties in the Nashville area. Her mother sat on the boards of 2 nonprofits and spent her weekends at charity galas where the entry fee alone could cover a month of my mortgage. They were polite to me exactly once. At the first dinner, Daniel arranged. After that, polite became distant, and distant became something colder that I didn't have a word for yet. Vanessa herself was not unkind in the beginning. She was sharp, well-dressed, ambitious in the way that people are when they've never had to worry about the consequences of failure. She had opinions about everything: restaurants, neighborhoods, the right kind of car to drive, the right kind of family to come from. She expressed those opinions with the confidence of someone who had never been seriously contradicted. I noticed over time that Daniel stopped calling during his commute. Sunday dinners became every other Sunday, then once a month, then subject to Vanessa's schedule. When I'd ask Daniel about it directly, he'd laugh it off, say they'd been busy, promise to come by soon. He always sounded slightly distracted, like he was half listening to me and half monitoring something else in the room. I told myself it was just the adjustment of a new relationship. I told myself Carol went through something similar when Daniel was a teenager and started preferring his friends to his family. I told myself it would settle. It didn't settle. About 2 years into their relationship, Daniel told me over the phone that he and Vanessa were engaged. I congratulated him. I meant it. I asked when I could take them both to dinner to celebrate. He said he'd check with Vanessa and get back to me. He never got back to me about that dinner. 3 weeks later, Vanessa called me directly for the first time in months. She was warm in the deliberate way that people are warm when they want something. She talked about how excited they were, how she'd already started envisioning the venue, how it was going to be an event that reflected their life together and the families they came from. Then she mentioned that her family had certain expectations about the wedding, that her parents hosted a beautiful rehearsal dinner for her older sister and felt strongly about maintaining that tradition, that the actual wedding itself, the venue, catering, flowers, photography, honeymoon, would naturally fall to Daniel's side of the family to host. I asked her to clarify what she meant by Daniel's side of the family. She said, gently but without hesitation, "You, Robert." I asked her what number she was working with. She said they hadn't finalized everything yet, but were thinking somewhere in the range of $300,000 to $350,000. She added that her parents would of course be covering the rehearsal dinner, which she estimated at around $40,000. She said it as though she was doing me a favor. I did not respond immediately. I had learned, over 3 decades of contract negotiations, that silence is a more powerful tool than most people give it credit for. After a long pause, I told her I would think about it and that I appreciated her calling. She thanked me and said Daniel was so grateful to have a father who understood the importance of this moment. I hung up, sat down at my kitchen table, and thought about Carol. Carol would have known what to do immediately. She had an instinct for people that I always respected but never fully possessed myself. She would have looked at Vanessa and seen exactly what was underneath the warmth and the good manners. I had to learn it the slower way. Over the next several weeks, I started paying closer attention. I noticed that Vanessa had a lifestyle Instagram account with nearly 80,000 followers. I noticed that the wedding planning was being documented in real-time venue tours, tasting menus, floral consultations, all photographed beautifully, all captioned with language about creating memories and celebrating love. I noticed that several posts included quiet mentions of brands, catering companies, florists, a luxury honeymoon resort in the Maldives, with a link in the bio. I'm a project estimator. I know what it looks like when someone is tracking a return on an investment. I called my old colleague Frank, who had retired 2 years before me and spent his post-career years doing exactly the kind of independent financial consulting that I needed. I explained the situation. He asked me to send him the links to Vanessa's social media pages. He called me back 4 days later. He said, carefully, that what he was seeing was consistent with influencer marketing infrastructure, that the wedding, at the scale being described, photographed the way it was being photographed, with brand mentions in the captions, could generate between $60,000 and $120,000 in sponsored content value over the following year. That the Maldives honeymoon resort had a known track record of providing complimentary or deeply discounted packages to accounts with Vanessa's follower count in exchange for documented content. That the $40,000 rehearsal dinner her family was graciously covering would likely also be fully reimbursed through a combination of vendor partnerships and gifted services. He said, in plain terms, someone was being asked to finance a content production budget while believing they were paying for a wedding. I asked him if he was certain. He said he wasn't certain about the intent. He was certain about the pattern. I thanked him, hung up the phone, and sat with that information for a full week before I did anything with it. I wanted to be fair. I wanted to make sure I wasn't reading something into a situation because I already felt pushed out. So I tested it. The way I used to test assumptions in project estimates. I looked for the thing that would disprove my theory, and I couldn't find it. I called Daniel, not to confront him, just to talk. I told him I'd been thinking about the wedding and that I wanted to understand what he was envisioning. I asked him what mattered most to him about the day. He talked for a few minutes about the venue, the guest count, the dinner menu. Everything he described was visual. Everything was about how it would look. I asked him if he and Vanessa had talked about what the day meant to them emotionally, beyond the aesthetics. He paused for a long time and then said Vanessa had put a lot of thought into the vision and he trusted her judgment. I asked if he had looked at the specific vendor contracts himself. He said Vanessa was handling that. I asked if he knew which vendors had brand partnership arrangements with Vanessa's account. Another long pause. He said he didn't know what I was implying. I told him I wasn't implying anything. I told him I loved him, and that I wanted to take him to lunch the following week. Just the two of us, to talk about things properly. He said he'd check with Vanessa and get back to me. He didn't get back to me. 2 weeks later, I received an email. It was from Vanessa, copied to Daniel, formatted with the precision of a business document. It outlined the wedding budget in full, venue deposit, catering per head, photography package, videography package, floral arrangements, rehearsal dinner contribution, honeymoon resort package, and a line item listed simply as incidentals. The total was $341,500. The email noted that as Daniel's only family, the responsibility for these costs would fall to me. It included a proposed payment schedule and asked for confirmation of my commitment within 30 days. Daniel did not add a single word to that email. I printed it, read it 3 times, and then called my attorney. Her name is Patricia, and I have known her for 20 years. She listened to everything I told her, asked me several precise questions, and then told me what my options were. We talked for 90 minutes. By the end of that call, I knew exactly what I was going to do, and more importantly, I knew exactly what I was not going to do. I sent a reply to Vanessa's email. I kept it short. I said I had received the budget, that I was reviewing it carefully, and that I would be in touch. I signed it warmly. I used the word excited. I gave her nothing to react to. Then I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the venue coordinator. I introduced myself as Daniel's father and said I was calling to understand the deposit structure before committing funds. She was forthcoming and professional. She mentioned, without my asking, that the venue had recently hosted 2 events associated with Vanessa's account and that they had an existing content agreement with her. I thanked her, told her I would be in touch regarding the deposit, and ended the call. The second call was to the lead photographer listed in the budget. He was even more forthcoming. He mentioned he'd worked with Vanessa on 3 previous projects, and that this engagement was part of an ongoing content relationship. He seemed to assume I was already aware of the arrangement. I now had what I needed. I did not call Daniel again. I did not send another email to Vanessa. I drafted a single letter, reviewed it with Patricia, and mailed it certified to both of them at the address Daniel had on file with me. The letter was polite and direct. It stated that I had reviewed the proposed budget. It noted that multiple vendors had confirmed existing content agreements with Vanessa's public platform. It stated that I was not in a position to fund what appeared to be a commercial content production under the description of a family wedding. It stated that I wished them both happiness and that I would be available to discuss a modest contribution in the range of what I had always planned to give as a wedding gift if they wished to revisit the conversation. It closed by saying that my door, as always, was open. I expected anger. I expected a phone call from Daniel that would be uncomfortable. What I did not expect was silence. For 3 weeks, nothing. Then Daniel called me on a Tuesday evening. He didn't sound angry. He sounded tired in a way I hadn't heard since the months after Carol died. He asked if he could come over. He came the following Saturday. He sat at the same kitchen table where I'd read Vanessa's email, and he told me that after receiving my letter, he had gone back through the vendor contracts himself for the first time, that he had found 3 separate agreements he hadn't known existed, that he had asked Vanessa about them directly, and the conversation had not gone well, that he had spoken to his own attorney, a friend from law school, who had given him advice I won't repeat, because it was given in confidence, but which clearly had an effect on him. He sat at my table for 4 hours. We talked about Carol. We talked about the years after she died. We talked about things we had never quite said to each other directly. He cried once, briefly, and I let him without saying anything because that's what he needed. He didn't say much about Vanessa directly. I didn't ask him to. That was not my door to open. What he did say, near the end of the evening, was that he was sorry. Not for anything specific, just sorry. And I told him there was nothing to be sorry for, which wasn't entirely true, but was what a father says when his son is sitting across from him looking like he's trying to find solid ground. I don't know what happens next between Daniel and Vanessa. That is genuinely not my story to tell. What I know is that my son called me last Sunday morning, the way he used to call during his commute, and we talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular, about the Buckeyes. About whether I should finally replace the gutters. About Carol. Carefully. The way you talk about someone you both miss so much. It still catches you off guard. I kept that invoice, the first one Vanessa handed me in person before the formal email arrived. I kept it in my shirt pocket for a week. I look at it sometimes. Not with anger, but the way you look at something that clarified things for you. A number on a page that told me more about a situation than any conversation could have. My father used to say that the most important thing a man can do in a difficult moment is resist the urge to react. That reaction feels like power but is usually the opposite of it. That real leverage is quiet, patient, and based entirely on what you actually know. I spent 31 years estimating the true cost of things before anyone signed a contract. I was not going to stop doing that for my own family. Carol raised a son worth fighting for. I just had to make sure he could see the contract clearly enough to decide for himself. That, it turned out, was all I ever needed to do.